It's time to review another soundtrack. This time it's Mega Man 7, moving into the 16-bit world for the Mega Man franchise. And as usual, the one thing that won't change is I will once again just be doing the stage themes. So no password screen, no boss battles, no beginning and end credits, and no auto shop. This time the Dr. Wily stages have no repeats, so all 4 stages have their own theme, plus the 8 Robot Masters, plus the intro stage, and the Robot Museum mid-stage. So there's 14 total songs this time around, so we're going to be pretty busy with this one. As always, I'll preface this by saying that this list is just my opinion, not to be taken seriously, and I'm always more than happy to hear your take on it, whether you agree, disagree, or fall somewhere in the middle. It's always interesting to see what other people think. So anyway, let's get on with the list. At number 14, Dr. Wily Stage 2. It does have a pretty cool hi-hat and bass interplay here, but I mean that's about all it has going for it. It really comes off to me as a jarring version of the People's Core theme. It's just a little clumsy. I don't care for the way it all blends together. It's just kind of unappealing. The synth track, the lead melody, is out of place. I don't really know how else to describe it other than broken puzzle pieces that are just trying to mesh and fit together, and it doesn't. I mean, the rhythm section is fine, the bass and drums make sense, and they are what they are, but I don't care for it. It really doesn't do anything for me by itself, and that's about all I have to say about that one. At number 13, Dr. Wily Stage 4. Kind of surprising that the Wily stages are off to a bad start here. This one is, I don't know, just uninteresting and underwhelming. It's just kind of boring. I'm glad that they put it in this stage though, because this is the Robot Master rematch stage and you're not doing much besides going from boss battle to boss battle fairly quickly, so you're not really going to hear the song as much as you're going to be fighting Robot Masters. I do kind of like the end though, the way it goes back into the beginning of the loop. It's alright, but again, it's nothing special, and it's only one small sample of an otherwise boring tune. At number 12, Turbo Man. The main riff comes off as kind of irritating, and I think it's mainly because of the choice that they made for the keyboard sound. It should have had more attack on it, and not this warm pad synth that kind of sweeps. It should have been more stabby and, like I said, have more attack to it. It sounds a little bit better at the end when it revs up in tempo. I like the choices that they made with the synthesizer sounds here, and it is fitting for the stage, but I don't care for this one all that much. I wouldn't say that I find it grating or annoying, but the main riff kind of bothers me a little bit, and it's otherwise just one of those songs that doesn't have any parts to it that I really like all that much. I do gotta say that the bass is killer. I like the bass in this song. The bass in the whole soundtrack really does sound good, but this is a cool riff. But as far as the whole song in general, not so great. At number 11, Spring Man. This one sounds more like the end of the game, when the credits are rolling, you've beaten the game. It has got a very triumphant mood to it. It sounds more like you're already victorious and you haven't even faced the Robot Master yet. I get having it upbeat for Spring Man, it makes sense, but I think it's a little too much in that direction. I could have taken it back a couple of notches. They laid it on kind of a little bit thick with the springy upbeatness to it. It's alright. I wouldn't really say I dislike the song all that much, but I don't really like it either. You know, similar to Turbo Man, where there just aren't any parts that I really like all that much, but I do rank it a little bit higher just because it doesn't really have the production qualities that I would have changed. In other words, where Turbo Man had the main riff that I think should have had a different sound to it, and maybe it would have been better. Springman's was, for the song that they wanted to put together, it sounded the way it should have sounded. Whereas Turbo Man leaves me feeling disappointed because I think it could have been better, if that makes any sense. At number 10, the Robot Museum. Now, some of you might be surprised that I have this as low as I do. I like this for what it is, a cool little throwback. It's nice to hear the callbacks of Guts Man, Snake Man, and Heat Man, the little segments with those songs being included, and they flow together pretty nicely for a nice little kind of medley, but it's not really much more to me than a novelty interlude. I really feel like if they really wanted to go this route with something in the nostalgia realm, they could have done a little bit more. In the same way the Robot Museum stage isn't really much of a stage, it's just kind of there. A short little walk to the gate to do battle with the boss. So, you know, it's a nice little trip down memory lane, but it's just kind of like an incomplete little mashup job. At number 9, Cloudman. The cool thing about Cloudman is how much the song sounds like it belongs in the clouds. The intro is just absolute chaos. That feels like a storm to me. And the rest of it after is kind of the aftermath of the storm. So instead of the whole calm before the storm, the calm being the, warning of the storm coming, this sounds more like the aftermath of a storm. And there's a lot going on here. You've got the weightlessness of the synthesizer track, just those long sustaining notes, providing some atmosphere. The drums are still fairly busy all throughout, providing a contrast to that. And then a cool thing about it too is how you think that you've looped back to the main riff. The main riff being the one that comes right after that intro. But then it goes into another variation of the main riff, and then fires right back into the intro, and probably something like, I don't know, a minute and a half into the loop, so it's pretty long for a Mega Man song. It's a long loop anyway. I don't really think that there are any particular parts that I like a lot, but I do like that it doesn't stay in one place throughout. It's got some contrast to it, and I feel like I'm in the clouds, whether there's a storm brewing or not. It does a good job of grasping that atmosphere. At number 8, Junkman. This one is a pretty solid and straightforward rock song, more or less. The intro's got an interesting little, not off-time riff, but it's just kind of weird how when the notes come in against the drums. It's kind of cool. It's like that whole thing about jazz, it's the notes they're not playing. I kind of think of the same thing with this Junkman intro. But then the rest of the song is, like I said, straightforward. It's got a very quintessential Mega Man feel to it. You know that if you listen to the 8-bit version, or not the 8-bit version, like there's a definitive 8-bit version, but there are 8-bit versions of all of these songs. It sounds like it belongs right there at home with some of the older Mega Mans. Just a good groove, a good solid, straightforward, energetic tune. At number 7, Burst Man. It's got a pretty catchy main riff. There are basically 3 sections to the song, and they all have a nice contrast between them. You've got the hooky main riff in the beginning, the middle gets a little more mellow, and then it picks back up at the end for the conclusion. It's a pretty standard arrangement, but they do flow nicely into each other. They keep things varied enough so you don't lose interest. Rhythm section is really good. I like the drums a lot. The only thing I would say is that I think they overload on the cymbals a little bit too much, but it's otherwise a very good tune. Similar to Junkman's in that it's just a solid piece, front to back. At number 6, Slash Man. The riffs sound very much like standard fare Mega Man riffs. They just sound like they belong in a Mega Man game, and they do. But what's cool about it is that it's got a different vibe than just about any other Mega Man song, and it's really because of the steel drums that they throw in there. It gives it a very tropical, islandy sound, which does fit the Jurassic Park themed stage. But even putting that aside, the song does stand out on its own, and especially the end part where the steel drums come in a lot more than they do as just kind of a backdrop. They're kind of taking the wheel of the song at this point. It's a cool little mesh of, quote unquote, a Mega Man style song, and a genre that the franchise hasn't really delved into really all that much. I like Slash Mans a lot just for standing out on its own like that. At number 5, Dr. Wily Stage 3. This one kind of reminds me of Junkman in the whole energetic, up-tempo type of rhythm, but this one is different in that the beginning sounds to me like it's in the middle of the song. I feel like the intro is a bridge, and then like a couple measures in, we're already at what seems like it's building up towards the end, and it's like, alright, what is going on here? This is very in your face and dramatic. And while it doesn't really change in that regard, it doesn't have ebbs and flows in the way that like Burst Man did, for example. This one is very intense, but the riffs change too. And there's some really cool drum rolls and very subtle things. Like I like in the early part of the song, the main riff, how the notes kind of slide back to the main riff the second time as opposed to the first where it just goes to the next note. It not only separates it from the first instance of the riff, but it's just a cool sound altogether. I think it's a perfect choice for the penultimate stage. It feels like you're getting toward the end here with this one. At number 4, the intro stage. This is the opposite. Now we're at the beginning of the game, but much like the Dr. Wily Stage 3 song, this one also has a lot of energy and has that quintessential Mega Man feel. I remember the first time that I played this game, because unlike any other Mega Man game, this one gives you a legit first stage, a stage 1 that you have to complete before you can start picking where you want to go. So this is I've always looked at this as kind of like the album opener. But I remember when I first played the game and heard this song, I just said, I know I'm gonna love this soundtrack. I love how it just has all that energy, it comes out and punches you right in the face. It's a really cool main riff. I know I've mentioned it several times, but I really like the rhythm section. The bass and drums are fucking great. I do kind of wish that the second half of the song was a little bit longer. I think it ends a little bit too soon. But I love the lead riff, I love the bass riff, I love the drums. And because it's basically like the album opener, and I like how it had, some more complicated riffs toward the end, it felt more like an older school Mega Man song. Like I said, the only drawback is it's a little short, and playing the game it's a little short too because it's the intro stage and you don't get a lot of time to hear it anyway, so they probably kept it short and sweet for that reason. But it's a great tune, nevertheless. At number 3, Freeze Man. This is a catchy as hell main riff. It's very upbeat and I don't want to say poppy, but it is very accessible. I remember the first time I heard the riff, I think maybe by the time I heard the riff only the second time, I was like, alright, yep, they hooked me, they got me with this hook. That's a very effective hook. As far as the second half of the song, it's not quite as strong as the first, but it complements it well. It's adding a different dimension to the song, so when it comes back to the first verse, it's like you got a little bit of a break from that. And on top of that, when it goes back to the main verse, it's actually not looping back to the beginning. When the verse repeats, there's this added layer of synth over the main melody. I love that for a couple of reasons. It distinguishes this from the first verse, for one thing. Keeps it from being a little predictable and robotic. I don't know, it's a very satisfying, soothing, lovely little layer on there. It's little things like that I tend to get drawn into.
So between all of that, the catchy main riff, the contrast between the two halves of the song, and the main verse going back and forth between having that overlay on top of it, make this a very tight package. At number 2, Dr. Wily Stage 1. So we go from very catchy and vibrant to dark and dirty. The rhythm section is the focal point of this song here. That slap bass is just so fucking good. And there's some really nice drum fills. I mean, those drums and bass are like Jordan and Pippin. And there's also a nice little ringing in the intro, kind of like a bell. The lead instrument, the guitar sound, you definitely tell they're going for guitar. It has that rough, dirgy, grindy guitar sound. It's a really cool riff, and the interesting thing too is that it takes like 40 seconds before you even hear it. And really the main verse of the song, it doesn't, forget what I said about Cloudman having a long loop. This one has by far the longest intro in any Mega Man song up to this point, and maybe of all time. It's such a slow build, and when it finally comes in, it's very satisfying. Sometimes the guitar sounds a little weird when the notes are very close to each other because of the tone that they chose for it, but it is a really cool combination of sounds. At number 1, Shade Man. Speaking of dark, this one also has a dark intro, and it's a pretty dark vibe throughout, but after the slow, brooding intro, it kicks into high gear and remains pretty up-tempo throughout. But it's a nice contrast. You've got this deliberate paced melody on top of the heavy, fast drum pattern. It's a nice contrast. It sounds cool as shit. And I love how the intro is brought back, but in a heavier variation, with the drums remaining heavy, giving the revisit to the intro a much different feel. In fact, you don't even really think that you're back at the beginning of the loop, albeit with a different drum pattern behind it, because you've just calibrated yourself to the second half of the song. It's really effective, really cool, and I like how, similar to the Dr. Wily Stage 1, how this one just sounds like it belongs in a different, not to say it doesn't belong with Mega Man, but it is definitely distinct. You're not going to confuse this with any other Mega Man song. And I like it when, I mean, not to say that these are the same composers. The composers change constantly throughout the Mega Man games, but you get the feel like there's a pattern. I feel like some of the songs on the soundtrack, Shade Man definitely being one of them, is trying to step out of that comfort zone a little bit and do something unique. And Shade Man is not just a unique song, but it's a very good one. So I kind of hold it in high regard for being able to accomplish both. So that wraps up Mega Man 7. Just a quick recap here. At number 14 was Dr. Wily Stage 2. At number 13, Dr. Wily Stage 4. Number 12, Turbo Man. Number 11, Spring Man. Number 10, The Robot Museum. Number 9, Cloud Man. Number 8, Junk Man. Number 7, Burst Man. Number 6, Slash Man. Number 5, Dr. Wily Stage 3. Number 4, the intro stage. Number 3, Freeze Man. Number 2, Dr. Wily Stage 1. And number 1, Shade Man. So that does it for me. What do you guys think? What songs did you like? What would you say your ranking is? What did you agree with? What did you disagree with? I'd like to hear it. And that wraps up this edition of Ranking the Soundtrack. See you next time.